All right, friends, I'm going to be talking about subsidy. Um, I'm going to be arguing for both sides. Is this subsidy issue a scam or real? Okay. The central question, whether President Tinubu, when he announced on May the 29th, 2023, that fuel subsidy is gone, the public was told in essence, the government can no longer afford the subsidy. The money being wasted would be redirected into a productive investment and social development. There is a legitimate economic argument behind that. Everybody was happy, but was surprised. Now, Nigeria's old subsidy system was extraordinarily expensive and had a long history of fraud, opacity, and poor targeting. NNPC record that subsidy expenditure reached above 2.5 trillion in 2011, roughly 10 times the amount originally budgeted, and that more than 30 companies were indicted in connection with the problems surrounding the scheme. A 2012 parliamentary investigation produced an even more disturbing picture, with Reuters reporting an estimated 6.8 billion fuel subsidy fraud involving claims of fuel that was allegedly never delivered, duplicate cargo declarations, and other irregularities. So abolishing a corrupt and fiscally expensive subsidy system was not by itself an irrational policy. The real question is, what happened to the money after the subsidy was removed? And that is where the Tinubu administration deserves much more scrutiny. 1. Nigeria has documented history of subsidy corruptions. This is not a conspiracy theory, this is real. Nigeria fuel subsidy system becomes one of the classic examples of how a legitimate public policy can be captured by politically connected interests. The 2012 subsidy scandal was enormous. Investigation found allegations involving payment for fuel that had not actually been delivered, and duplicate claims were made. And there is another uncomfortable historical lesson. The man who chaired the House committee investigating the subsidy scandal, Farouk Lawan, was himself later convicted of accepting 500,000 bribe, dollar bribe, connected to the investigation. Nigerian Supreme Court upheld the conviction in 2024. All right? Think about what that tells us. Even the institution established to investigate corruption surrounding the subsidy became entangled in corruption. That is the Nigerian governance problem in miniature. It is therefore perfectly legitimate to ask, if the old subsidy system was corrupt, why should Nigerians simply trust the government that replaced it without demanding unprecedented transparency? Secondly, the strongest argument against calling Tinubu's reform a scam, we must be fair. The IMF has consistently argued that fuel subsidies are expensive, distort market, and also poorly targeted. Its analysis of Nigeria specifically described the PMS subsidy as a regressive, imposing a large fiscal burden and distorting resource allocation. That's from IMF. The World Bank itself has similarly argued that petrol subsidies tend to benefit richer households disproportionately because wealthier Nigerians consume more fuel, own more vehicles, and generate more economic activities around fuel consumption. That is World Bank. And Tinubu's government has a legitimate argument. Before the reform, Nigeria was effectively borrowing, printing, or diverting public resources to keep petrol artificially cheap. That is not sustainable. The government says removing the subsidy strengthens public finances and created room for infrastructure and other investment. That is Federal Ministry of Information and Orientation that made these statements. There are also signs that the reform has produced some, macroeconomic benefits. But look at what Reuters said. Reuters reported this month that Finance Minister Taiwo Oyedele says the reform helps stabilize public finances, strengthen foreign reserves, and attract investment. That's according to Reuters. So if someone says there was never economic justification for removing the subsidy, I would disagree. There was. Thirdly, but here is the strongest argument for calling the implementations a scam. Okay? The problem is that removing a subsidy is not the same thing as eliminating government support for petrol. This distinction is absolutely crucial. In 2024, Reuters reported that although Tinubu had announced the subsidy was gone, NNPC continued to cap domestic petrol prices while international costs were higher. That effectively caused the subsidy to reappear, with the government expecting it could cost billions of dollars. That's according to Reuters. So Nigerians were told subsidy is gone. But the economics become more complicated. The state was still absorbing costs in different ways. That creates a legitimate question. Was the subsidy actually abolished, or was part of it simply moved off the traditional subsidy line? That is not a semantic question. Okay, it goes directly to transparency. Fourth, the 17.5 trillion question is potentially explosive, but needs nuance. It needs some nuance. In July 2026, a major debate erupted over an approximate 17.5 trillion receivable and liability record by NNPCL. Critics have described it as subsidy in disguise, but we need to be extremely careful here. The entire 17.5 trillion should not automatically be labeled fuel subsidy. The reporting itself notes that the figure includes other obligations and mechanisms arising under the Petroleum Industry Act, while an analyst argued that a substantial component represent an implicit subsidy because government was still absorbing part of the cost of the petrol. That's according to Vanguard News. That distinction is very important, but it makes the question more, not less important. All right. If subsidy has been completely abolished, why is the government still absorbing significant petrol-related costs, and exactly how much? That is what Nigeria call it a scam. Nigerians deserve a line-by-line answer. If it is not a scam, defend it with evidence. Fifth, the World Bank identified a notorious problem, with the promised savings. This is perhaps one of the most important pieces of evidence. The World Bank reported that the expected fiscal gains from the subsidy removal did not materialize as expected, partly because of low remittance from NNPC. That's according to the World Bank documents. That is a huge issue. Imagine telling a Nigerian we are increasing petrol prices because the government is going to save trillions. Well, the more you see, the more you look, the less you see. That citizens has a legitimate right to ask, where are the trillions? If the savings are real, show them. If NNPC retains some of the money, show it. If the money went to debt servicing, show it. If it went to infrastructure, show the project. If it went to social programs, show the beneficiaries. If it went to state governments, show the transfers. This should not be a political argument, it should be an accounting exercise. Sixth, and how the government itself admits something extremely important. This is where the debate becomes much more interesting. Stay to listen. In July 2026, Nigeria Finance Minister acknowledged that much of the financial benefit from the fuel subsidy removal and the foreign exchange reforms had been absorbed by higher debt servicing costs and increased government spending. That's according to Reuters. That admission does not prove corruption, but it completely changes the political argument. Because Nigerians were told subsidy removal will be free money, with free money for development. So if the savings are subsequently swallowed by debt servicing, okay, by debt servicing, remember that word, debt servicing, government expenditures, other fiscal pressures, all right, then Nigerians have every right to ask. Okay, Nigerians have every right to ask, what exactly did we gain? The government can legitimately answer, we prevented fiscal collapse. That is a valid argument. But it is different from the money is now transforming ordinary Nigerian lives. Those are two completely different claims. Okay? Those are two completely different claims. Seventh, this is where Tinubu'S government faces its biggest credibility problem. The government can show improvement in certain macroeconomic indicators. Investors may be more confident. Foreign reserve may improve. The fiscal positions may improve. Domestic refinery may reduce imports. Okay? The currency market may become more predictable. Those things matter. Those things matter. But macroeconomic stabilization is not the same thing as improving living standard of your citizens. When the citizen can't feel the impact, those things doesn't matter. Reuters reported in August 2026 that Nigerians are still experiencing severe cost of living pressure, with food and fuel prices dramatically higher and many ordinary citizens not yet feeling the benefit of investment and macroeconomic gains. That's according to Reuters again. This is the fundamental contradictions. The government says the economy is improving, many Nigerians respond, then why are we suffering more? Both statements can technically be true. All right? The economy can stabilize at the macro level while households remain under enormous pressures. That is precisely why government must communicate, distributional outcomes, not just GDP reserves, and also investors' confidence. So if I may recollect, the number 8 item on the list is that the real scam question is not whether petrol should have been subsidized. There is, this is where I would take the argument. So the real question, the real scam question is not whether petrol should have been subsidized. This is where I would take my argument. The question is not, was subsidy good? No. Was subsidy bad? The better question is, was subsidy removal accompanied by sufficient transparency, accountability, and protection for Nigerians? If the answer is no, then the policy deserves serious criticism. Because government inefficiency or government effectively asks ordinary Nigerians to make an anonymous sacrifice while they are living large. Petrol prices increase dramatically. Transport costs increase, production costs increase, food prices increase, businesses face higher operating expenses, then how will the Nigerian citizen cope with the everyday life hardship? When the household cost, of living has skyrocketed, and when household lost purchasing power, the citizens are going to ask, are this government efficient? Do they deserve our votes? So if government asks citizens to absorb that pain in the name of national economic transformations, government must be able to demonstrate where the savings went. The 9th item on the list, and there is an even bigger historical problem. Nigeria has done this before. This is why Nigerians are suspicious and calling it a scam. Nigeria has repeatedly told Nigerian citizens, make sacrifice today, tomorrow will be better. But corruption, waste, inflated contract, poor public services, and opaque government finances have reportedly undermined that promise. The World Bank itself noted before subsidy reform that Nigerians had lost trust that government would use savings from subsidy removal properly. That's according to World Bank. That distrust didn't come from nowhere. It was created by a decade of governance failures. Therefore, Tinubu's administration cannot simply say, trust us. It must say, here are the accounts. Here is every naira saved. Here is where it went. Here are the projects. Here are the beneficiaries. Here is what independent auditors found. That is how you rebuild trust with the citizens. Number 10, there is also a danger of replacing one form of subsidy with another. This is a fascinating issue. Suppose Nigeria removes the consumers, subsidy, but then gives advantage to particular producers, producers. What happened? Preferential access to crude oil, favorable for a foreign exchange arrangement, tax concessions, government-backed financings, and regulatory protections. Those special pricing arrangements also will be asked, like import restrictions. Then the government can technically say, okay, the government can technically say there is no petrol subsidy. Okay, yeah, taxpayers or the wider economic may still be providing economic support elsewhere. That does not automatically make those policies corrupt. So maybe legitimate industrial policies, but they must be transparent and completely justified. Otherwise, Nigeria could, move from subsidizing consumers to subsidizing the rich. Okay? Subsidizing the selected producers. And Nigerians have every right to ask who benefits from this. Let's go to the question of Dangote. Dangote adds another dimension to the debate. The emergence of Dangote refinery could ultimately be one of the biggest benefit of the reform. Nigeria has spent decades producing, oil and then importing refined petroleum. The absurdity is captured perfectly by the phrase crude out, refined fuel in. You understand that? Crude out, refined fuel in. Nigerian state refineries have absorbed enormous sums in rehabilitations attempts without delivering the expected performances. The Financial Times note that roughly about $25 billion have been spent on failed refinery rehabilitations, and nothing comes out of it. If domestic refining finally becomes, competitive, Nigeria could reduce petrol import, foreign exchange demands, shipping costs, and other related expenses. Import-related vulnerabilities could also be avoided. That would be a genuine structural benefit. So when Nigerians call this subsidy a scam, they are not mistaken, because the government have not proven to them that they were able to use the savings to better their own life. Okay? But it also raises another question. Is Nigeria creating a competitive petroleum market or replacing government subsidies dependence with excessive concentrations in one private supplier? Again, the answer should be determined by transparent market data. So is Tinubu's subsidy removal a scam? Let's answer that question in totality. My answer is the evidence does not justify saying that subsidy removal itself has been proven to be a scam, but there's enough evidence to justify a very serious investigation into whether Nigerians receive the fiscal benefit promised from its removal. Okay, there are at least 5 legitimate questions. 1, exactly how much subsidy expenditure was eliminated. 2, exactly how much has government saved each year. 3, how much of these savings equally enter the federation account. And then 4th, how much remained with NNPC or was used to offset petroleum-related obligations. Finally, 5th, where did every naira of the net savings go? Until those questions are answered transparently, Nigerians are justified to be skeptic and calling subsidy a scam. And there is the strongest argument I will make. Don't tell Nigerians, please. Tinubu stole the subsidy money. Unless you have a documentary evidence to prove that. That weakens the argument. Instead, say, okay, I repeat, instead say, Tinubu asked Nigerians to accept unprecedented economic pain because subsidy removal would save the country enormous amount of money. Therefore, the government has an obligation to provide unprecedented transparency about those savings. That's much harder to attack. That's much harder to attack. Then ask, where is the money? Where is the money? Not the rhetoric. Show the accounts. Show the NNPC books. Okay, show the federation account. Show the transfers. Show the debt service allocations. All right. Show the infrastructure project. Show the social protection expenditure. Show the state by state distribution. Show the independent audit. Show Nigerians exactly what happened to the money. That is what is called transparency. The final test, it will reduce the entire debate to one sentence. If subsidy removal was genuinely designed to rescue Nigerians rather than merely transfer wealth and economic power from one group to another, then the government should have another thing to fear from radically transparency. The old subsidy regime had a documented history of fraud and waste. Okay, so Nigeria should not defend the old corrupt system simply because the new system is painful. But equally, Nigeria should not accept the new system simply because the old one was corrupt. Corruption is corruption, fraud is fraud, scam is scam. One corrupt system cannot be replaced by another opaque system and call it reform. The standard should be much higher. I repeat, the standard should be much higher. No subsidy fraud, no hidden subsidy, no political subsidy, no corporate favoritism, no opaque NPC accounting, no unexplained trillions, no trust us instead. Independent audit, publish account, competitive markets, transparent petroleum pricing, targeted protection for poorest Nigerians, okay, and measurable evidence that the sacrifice Nigerians were forced to make is actually producing a better country. That is the difference between economic reform and simply changing who controls the money. And ultimately, Tinubu should be judged not merely by whether he removed the subsidy, but by what Nigerians receive in return for the enormous sacrifice Nigerians were asked to make. Okay? I repeat once more, Tinubu should not be judged not merely by whether he removed the subsidy, but by what Nigerians receive in return for the enormous sacrifice Nigerians were asked to make. Fellow Nigerians, I rest my case.